Hi everyone, and welcome back to Jim Vernon Solutions, the Learn HTML tutorial using W3 Schools. We're in the HTML colors chapter and wrapping up the RGB subchapter with this one. We covered the basics of what the different codes mean and how you can easily use the sliders in W3 Schools to pick out colors that appeal to you. In this one, we're going to do the try it yourself examples. And all we're really going to do with this first one is let's change the third row actually, from some shade of green, I'm not exactly sure what I'd call it, to what I would call a pure shade of green, where it's 0 for red, 255 for green, 0 for blue. We'll change the labels. Sorry. Try to make them accurate, and then we'll run it. And on the top three rows now we have a pure red, a pure blue, and what I would call the pure green, although recall that the actual named color green in HTML is a darker shade of green. Let's move on to the next try it yourself, which is shades of gray. And all we want to do here, I think, notice that when all of the values are equal, you get a shade of gray. Let's see what happens if we go to the extremes and make the 60s 0, which would be no source of red, no source of green, or 0, right? Levels of the sources of light there, and then let's make them 255 on the opposite end. And of course, if we just run this, nothing will change because I didn't change the HTML. But once I do change the HTML, you should be anticipating that the first row is going to have a little bit of difficulty reading those labels because the background will be a solid black. On the other hand, whoops, I kind of screwed those up. The last row will be very easy to read, but it won't look like it has a background at all because it'll be white on white with black text. So if we run this, we see you can get any shade of gray from pure black, which is the darkest shade of gray, to pure white, the lightest shade of gray. Okay, and then if we run down to the RGBA try it yourself example, we can see again we're using different shades of the tomato color, different opacity I should say. I'm going to pause and actually add some rows here. So I paused just to save some time here. You can see what I've done is I've cleaned up the HTML a little bit, adding the precision decimal places just to make it a little easier to read. And then I've gone from 0.0 in increments of 0.1 all the way up to 1.0. So if I run it now, I get a broader array of the transparent at the top to the fully opaque at the bottom, which is the 1.0. And then I want to try one last thing, and I'll even just leave this on as I type it. Let's take that 0.5 and add a row between 0.5 and 0.6 and see if we can play with even finer grain control. Let's make it a 0.55, and you will potentially see that it kind of messes up the HTML because it's a little bit too long. But if we run this now, we do get an extra row, and you can possibly barely see that it is in between the levels of opacity for 0.5 and 0.6. An easier way to see that is if we make it 0.59, which to me is indistinguishable with my eyes from the 0.6, but easily distinguishable then from the 0.5. I don't know about your eyesight, but that's kind of the way mine works. The point is you have an awful lot of control over the opacity as well through this method, and you can see how you would be able to get pretty much any shade of gray you might want with this if, again, you started at 0, 0, 0 and then just change the alpha channel to any decimal number between 0 and 1 that you might like. Okay. So then that concludes the RGB subchapter, and we'll pick it up the next time with the hex subchapter.